You'll need this word. Hello and welcome to the GhostÉire Channel. My name's Anthony Kerrigan and tonight I'm joined by Larry Arnold from Parascience International. Also, Larry is an expert in SHC, which is spontaneous human combustion. He is the world's renowned expert in this particular subject. Also tonight, folks, we will be talking about precognition and Larry's findings as he envisaged a nuclear reactor meltdown. We'll be going more into that. Also, we were talking to Larry about the Pennsylvania and Bermuda Triangle and an expedition led by Larry to see what was underneath the water. But Larry will explain that more. I might be wrong, but Larry will explain that more. Also tonight, folks, we have a poll. We'll reveal the results of the poll. The question we asked: do you believe in that spontaneous human combustion, the combustion of living or recently deceased persons without an apparent external force can occur? So we'll be revealing the results around about another 3/4 of an hour. Also, we will have a quiz, so stay tuned for that as well. I'm just going to give a few shouts out. First, Louise Walsh says hi. Hi, Louise. How you doing? Now, we might be having a bit of problem. I don't know if it's the weather there, because I think the what I can see is the reception's quite low there. But if we're coming across good to you guys, that's brilliant there. Paul O'Brien says hi, friends. Hi, Paul. Long time no seen. Been well. Been busy out. Teresa O'Carroll says hey. How you doing, Teresa? How you doing? Jenny from Emerald Owl Paranormal Research says, good evening, share to Emerald Owl Paranormal Research page. Looking forward to this. And Bridget Burke from Secrets of the Afterlife says hi. And Jane and Madden says hi. Hi, Jane. We will be coming to your questions in between or experiences. If you'd like to leave a comment, please do on this post. You can also go to our website, www.ghostére.net, go to the contact page, fill in the blanks. If you have a private message, just put in brackets private message. Also, if you want to watch future show, what's coming up in the future or past shows, go to our GhostÉire channel by going onto the homepage, pressing the red button, and you'll see what's there. Larry, finally, I can come to you there. How you doing, Larry?
Hi, Anthony. We're doing well here in Pennsylvania. It is a delight and a thrill for us to be with you tonight and with your listeners, particularly since you're broadcasting from Ireland. We were blessed to have our first trip to your homeland back in 2016. You guys treated us incredibly well as we drove ourselves up and down the Wild Irish Way. And we're looking forward to a second or third or fourth trip back to your homeland someday.
Oh, it'd be wonderful to have you, Larry, there. I'm just going to just a couple more shouts out before we just go on to the first subject. TJ says hi all, and Derek, hi Derek, hi lads, hope you are well there. Derek, I'll be in contact with you soon. Derek there, something in regards to the book, I'll be in contact with you very, very soon there, Derek. I hope you keep well. Love to all the family. So the first topic we're going to be talking to you, Larry, about there, and it's you're the expert in this there, spontaneous human combustion. Tell me, what got you involved in the topic there?
That's an easy one to answer, and thank you for calling us an expert in the field on this particular subject. It is a very bizarre and for many people quite frightening one. And because we have done so much work and have concluded over multiple decades of researching this phenomenon that history has called spontaneous human combustion, in the minds of many and in the words of many, that makes us a world-class fool, because clearly this doesn't happen, they say, officially. What got us interested in the subject was a book that we read back in junior high school, which puts us back in the mid-1960s, called Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards. In that book, Mr. Edwards had a chapter about an incredible incineration that befell a lady in Florida, here in the United States, back in 1951, Mary Hardy Reeser. And we'll probably talk about that in a few minutes. Real succinctly, she burned herself basically to powder in an environment that was largely devoid of any other fire or heat damage. Okay. And the local officials at the time were just bumfuddled by this. And as we went through our high school and later college years, we would talk to our teachers and professors about this. And if they heard of it at all, which was extraordinarily rare, they simply said they didn't know anything about it, or it was probably a dropped cigarette or careless smoking incident. Okay. When we left college and got out of electrical engineering, we decided to pursue this further because, well, lots of people seem to be investigating UFOs and cryptids and things like that. We couldn't find anybody who seemed to be doing serious research into spontaneous human combustion. So we decided to go down to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. and spend a weekend plowing through rolls of microfilm and archived newspapers to see if what we read about in junior high school had been based on fact, or if Mr. Edwards had created a fictionalized version of something that really happened. And what we discovered was that the Mary Reeser case in 1951 was front page news in the local newspapers in Tampa and St. Petersburg, Florida. We thought, gee, is this a one-off, just a really strange fire that did really have a prosaic explanation, or might there be other cases like this? So we stayed at the Library of Congress and started plowing through tombs, books, reference materials, later extended our research to the College of Physicians here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, pulling up books that had literally layers of dust on them. They'd not been brought up from the librarian archives for probably a century. And we started finding more cases that sounded like Mary Reeser. And then in 1975, we got tipped off to a possible case of SHC, what we prefer to call sudden human cremation, that happened here in our home state of Pennsylvania. And that would turn out to be the case of Dr. John Irving Bentley. And we'll be happy to talk to you about that too. But when we got the photographs of Dr. Bentley's death scene, we were just blown away because it was so radically different from any other photograph of a burn to fatality that we'd seen heretofore in toxicology volumes. So we started a quest. We thought it would take us a couple more weeks to document this. We ended up devoting a good chunk of our life to tracking down these incredibly rare, utterly fascinating, and as far as mainstream science is concerned, absolutely nonsensical cases of extreme human combustion.
And as you talked about Dr. Bentley there, the case about that, what happened in that there? You said it was kind of graphic.
Yeah, graphic is a really good adjective to use for Dr. Bentley. Let us reach over here over our shoulder and get the photograph.
Okay.
This is the amazing fire fatality scene that Dr. Bentley left in his bathroom floor in Coudersport in north central Pennsylvania on the morning of December 5, 1966. Dr. Bentley left behind as his legacy to the world of fire science, half of one leg, possibly a skull, which may be this round object here on the rafters. Yeah. Below, in the basement floor, below his bathroom flooring, the meter reader who discovered this remarkable fire scene, named Don Gosnell, kicked with his work boot when he was down in the basement to read the gas meter in Dr. Bentley's home, a pile of ashes that was about 5 inches in height and 14 inches in diameter, about like that.
Okay.
That was the remains of Dr. Bentley's body, aside from half of one leg. There was no evidence of accelerant, no evidence of foul play. Dr. Bentley clearly was not a suicide. Until the morning of December 5, 1966, everybody thought that the 92-year-old family physician, general practitioner in Countersport, was not only beloved, but in pretty good health. But something overnight struck him down in a way that just utterly baffled the local fire officials. They kept the details of this remarkable fire scene pretty much to themselves, and it was by happenstance that we got tipped off to the case and then spent a weekend investigating it, actually multiple weeks thereafter. Talking to everybody that we could find, the first responders, the newspaper editor, the deputy coroner. We spoke to the coroner involved. And what we came away with when we got the photograph was something that just simply, utterly defied common sense. A fire scene like this should not have happened. We were at that fire scene. By the time we got there, the hole in the floor had been patched over, but we could still look at and touch the oaken beams down in the basement, one of which had almost completely burned through. Oak is a difficult wood to burn. We stood in Dr. Bentley's bathroom. We're roughly 6 feet in height. We could stretch our hand upward to the ceiling and touch the ceiling. There was not a scorch mark on that ceiling. Back to the photograph. Dr. Bentley's bathtub that you can see here directly above the perimeter of the hole through which his body immolated was painted with enamel paint. That paint did not blister. Okay. The aluminum walker that he used to locomote through his 2-room apartment will melt at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum walker is clearly intact, although 2 of the rubber tips are missing. Right. To cremate a body in a retort requires temperatures of 22 to 2400 degrees for a couple of hours. And what comes out of the retort is not just ash, but bone fragments, which are then put on a cremulator to be ground to powder and put in an urn to be given to the next of kin. Dr. Bentley burned himself more completely, more efficiently than can be done in the most modern crematorium retorts. Jeez, without the aid of an accelerant.
That's yeah, because you said there, like as you just explained it, like a crematorium, and this was even more. Whatever happened there was even more, I suppose, more unique and more intense. The flame. Can you tell us that? Does this? How old was Dr. Bentley again? You said.
Yeah, Dr. Bentley was 92 years of age at the time. Everyone that knew him that we were able to interview said he was in good health, in good spirits. He had broken his hip a couple years earlier, which is why he needed the walker to locomote through his 2-room apartment. But other than that, he was mentally keen. He enjoyed conversing and indeed arguing with the townsfolk. Everybody to whom we spoke just loved him. He had spent his whole medical career up in Countersport, had no known enemies. And again, there was no evidence that his home had been broken into. As the first responder who discovered this remarkable fire scene told us, when he walked into the home on the morning of December 5, a Monday morning, to read the gas meter in the basement, he first encountered a wispy smoke in the hallway and a sweet, odd aroma that he couldn't quite characterize. When he came back up and thought he'd just check in on Dr. Bentley before leaving the house to continue on his rounds reading other people's gas meters, he knocked on the door and got no response. Stuck his head in through the living room door and did not see Dr. Bentley sitting anywhere in the living room. Well, the only other room, as Don knew, was Dr. Bentley's bathroom. So Mr. GhostÉire stepped into the apartment, stuck his head around into the bathroom floor, and saw what he first thought was a mannequin's leg on the bathroom floor. And only when he stooped down to look at it closer did he realize that this was not a mannequin leg, but a human leg. And then it dawned on him that the ashes that he had just kicked moments earlier in the basement had once been Dr. Bentley's body. He was aghast, he was horrified. He was certainly, as a volunteer firefighter, unprepared to encounter a fire scene anything like this. His quote to his co-workers when he ran down the street to alert them to this dilemma, to this remarkable, baffling fire, was Dr. Bentley burned up. Clearly the understatement of 1966 in our view.
And yeah, that's amazing. Even if a firefighter can come in and say he's not seen this before, that makes it even more unusual. I suppose people would associate with spontaneous human combustion. They would see the photograph mostly associated it, and it's the Cinder Woman. Could you explain a bit about this lady there? What happened? What's the circumstances with this case?
Happy to do that. The Cinder Woman, also known as Mary Hardy Reeser, was by coincidence or synchronicity perhaps, also a Pennsylvania native, as was Dr. Bentley, as is ourselves. But in 1951, she had momentarily retired to St. Petersburg, Florida, and she decided that she didn't like the heat and humidity down there, and she was planning to come back to her native Pennsylvania to spend the rest of her days. Apparently alive and healthy, the evening of July 1st, 1951, about 9 o'clock, she had been visited by her son and another friend, and they left her sitting in an easy chair in her apartment in St. Pete. The following morning, a Western Union messenger arrived with a telegram to give Mrs. Reeser information about her anticipated return to her home state of Pennsylvania. Gave the telegram to Pansy Carpenter, who was Mrs. Reeser's landlady. When Pansy went to open the door to Mrs. Reeser's apartment, she screamed because the door handle was hot to her touch. Two gentlemen who were painting a home across the street heard the alarm. They came over, broke the door down, and discovered a scene that was remarkably similar to Dr. Bentley's, although, of course, they did not know that at the time because this was 1951. This created a local sensation in the media. The fire officials were absolutely bumfuddled. She was burned so completely that 2 firefighters had to shovel up her ashes, including the chair in which she immolated, and remove them from the premises. We had the privilege of talking to one of those 2 firefighters, Nelson Aders, and we're going to quote, Nelson told us that as he shoveled up her remains, he called the scene quite a phenomenon. Other investigators looked at it, the St. Pete Police Department and the fire department as well. They were using adjectives like fantastic, unbelievable, and weird. This is a fire scene unlike they had ever encountered themselves. Once again, as with the Bentley case, there was this incredible evidence that suggested this must have been an incredibly hot fire. And yet surrounding combustibles like bedspreads and stacks of newspapers around Mrs. Reese's chair remained intact. There was the sweet aroma, which is quite atypical of normal burned human flesh, which smells often quite noxious. There should have been a tremendous amount, and it looked like the fire had been very quick. If this had been a slow smoldering fire, as many naysayers say, is the explanation for these remarkable fire scenes, you would have seen a lot of smoke, you would have seen a lot of heat damage around the area. That wasn't the case. At the time, it just so happened that there was vacationing in St. Pete, a world-renowned forensic anthropologist by the name of Dr. Wilton Marion Krogman. He had taken an interest in what it requires in terms of thermal energy to destroy human cadavers. He had done experiments, and with his professional background and being in St. Pete at the time that Mrs. Reeser immolated, he took a professional as well as personal interest in this case. And he said that if he were living in the Middle Ages, he'd mutter something about black magic. This is so bizarre to him. He wrote, and he later told us when we had the opportunity to interview him face to face, that this belied everything that he knew about how a human body could burn to the extent that Mrs. Reeser did. The evening before her death, she was estimated to have weighed about 170 to 175 pounds. The morning of July 2, 1951, what was shoveled out of her room, including the chair in which she sat, weighed about 8 pounds. She left behind a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, 1 foot in an unburned satin slipper, a few pieces of calcined spine, and what was described in several sources at the time as a shrunken head, a head shrunken to the size of a teacup or grapefruit. Again, this is not supposed to happen on a high heat fire. And yet the fire scene itself suggested that temperatures must have been extraordinarily high. Krogman told us in his experiments to incinerate a body to this extent under controlled scientific conditions required temperatures of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 uninterrupted hours. Those conditions
Okay.
Those conditions clearly were not present in Mrs. Reese's apartment in 1951.
And I suppose with the extreme heat, then, yeah, as we're going to talk on a bit further because of the surrounding area, SHC is mostly associated with just the body, and the surrounding area seems to be unaffected. As you mentioned as well, there that wood, some types of wood, they're hard to burn there, and it's actually that they won't actually burn there. But there's so much in a house that could be so flammable there that it beggars belief there what does happen. Can you tell us more about the candle effect? How does that happen? Like, how does the body ignite and the rest of the surrounding is okay? Like,
yep, we've been delighted to talk to you about the candle wick effect. This is the theory. This is the argument that naysayers of spontaneous human combustion, or in the cases of Dr. Bentley and Mrs. Reeser and several others that we'll talk with you about tonight, what we prefer to call sudden human cremation. Their argument is that all these people immolate slowly in a low heat fire over a very long period of time by the wick effect. The wick effect, as they define it, is what happens when the adipose tissue, the fatty material in the human body, is exposed to an external ignition source, i.e. a dropped cigarette or carelessly flung match, that ignites the victim's clothing. The burning of the clothing begins to melt the adipose tissue in the victim. In other words, they say cases of sudden human cremation are in essence an inverted and inside-out candle. The victim is ignited externally, then over many, many hours, slowly burns in a low heat fire and burns itself to powder. We have tried that many times in experiments in the early part of our research, because we concluded or decided that if there is something conventional that can explain these remarkable cases, so be it. The mystery is gone. We'll go look at something else. Every experiment that we have conducted to replicate or test the wick effect has utterly and laughably failed. Furthermore, if the wick effect did function as the naysayers claim that it does, here's a counter argument to that. How many people around the world own and operate crematoria? Thousands upon thousands upon thousands. They spend perhaps $100,000 buying a retort, filtration equipment, fuel oil or natural gas, all the licensings that are required to operate a crematorium safely, to incinerate a body that, as we said earlier, produces not just ash, but bone fragments in the retort. Those fragments then have to be mechanically ground in a cremulator to get the proverbial ash and dust given to the next of kin. If the wick effect worked, as the naysayers of SHC claim, all a crematorium operator would need to do would be to take the customer on a slab, lay a lit cigarette on the cadaver, walk away, have a leisurely lunch, come back a few hours later, and voila, a pile of ash on the table. That doesn't happen. We have spoken to, we don't know how many crematorium operators, and not one of them has ever told us they were able to burn a body remotely akin to what Dr. Bentley and Mrs. Reeser left behind as their legacies to the world of fire science. In fact, we had the incredible opportunity a few years ago to talk to not only a fire chief, but a fire chief who owned and operated a crematorium. So he knew from two different angles. Boy, was that a bad slip. He knew from two different angles, as a firefighter, a professional firefighter with more than 2 decades firefighting experience, as well as the owner operator of a functioning crematorium, how you burn a body and how a body can be burned in a normal combustion structure fire event.
Okay.
When we introduced ourselves to him to sit down and talk to him about our subject of research, he had no idea that a person could burn up as did Dr. Bentley and Mary Reeser. In his career as a firefighter, he not only had never encountered such a fire scene, he didn't even know they could happen. So this is one of the challenges of the research that we've had to face over our decades of looking into this phenomenon. So many in the fire service industry who you would think would know a lot about these kinds of fire scenes, know little, if anything, about them.
That's a good point, as you're saying. Like, if it hasn't been brought up in or educated to the firefighter, then it might be just pushed aside as just something that happened in the environment to cause the fire there. I suppose if it was more, we're going to probably talk about that a bit later as well, about how modern society feels about it there. I'm just going to go show a video first, and it's going to be from 4029, a news report there. And this is where Larry is interviewed, and it's about a case in, I think it's Oklahoma, but I think it's going to be put in, it's in the video anyway there. And soon enough, we're going to come to that case. I'm going to come to you. Well, first, I'll just come to your shouts out before I show the video. Jenny says, from Emerald Isle, says, I've seen that picture many years ago. I think that's to do with Dr. Bentley there. She says it's mind-boggling. Paul O'Brien says, interesting. I remember stories. One theory was alcohol and some flame ignited. I know that I suppose that there is, I suppose, a lot of thoughts towards, because it's old people and it might be alcohol.
Yeah.
But
this is one of the theories that was favored for SponCom before the Wick effect took over. Back in around 1850, if memory serves, 1852, Baron von Liebig was a noted chemist in his day, as famous then as Einstein is to your listeners today. He looked into this phenomenon and decided that probably these cases could be explained away as drunken sots, people who had consumed tremendous amounts of alcohol and burned in their own internal fuel, tissues soaked in alcohol. He conducted experiments, as we did ourselves, more than a century later, and both of us concluded that alcohol will not fuel these intense incinerations, at least not conventionally fuel them. So he dismissed SHC because alcohol was, in our view, he used the wrong fuel. That did not negate the cases, but it did negate the theory that alcohol is the mechanism by which these fires can be explained.
Okay. Adrian says, highlight, what experiments do you do to discount how bodies have burned?
If we understand Adrian's question, we have taken ham shanks. Some of our critics have taken slivers of fat, wrapped those slivers of fat in cheesecloth and held them over a Bunsen burner that's lit to show that fat will, when wrapped in a flammable material, will sustain combustion. Well, duh, we all know that. Anybody who's had a mishap barbecuing a steak will also be able to affirm that. But it's quite a different thing to sustain combustion in a sliver of fat versus to incinerate human bone to powder. That's a whole different ball game. What we have done was to take ham shanks, leg of a pig, with the bone intact. In one case, for an experiment that we did for the BBC, we had soaked that ham shank in a marinade of alcohol, brandy, vodka, and whiskey for a year. Took it out, wrapped it in cotton shirt material, laid it on a piece of old tar-based linoleum, the kind of flooring that was in Dr. Bentley's bathroom in 1966, lit it, stood back and waited. This was done in an outside environment, on limited supply of oxygen and in a light wind, ideal conditions to fuel a fire. After 90 minutes, the fire extinguished. 60 or 90 minutes, the fire went out. 99% of the sample was still intact. The BBC filmed this for a program that they aired back in 1999, if memory serves. And despite the evidence that the Wick effect did not work in this case, nor in any other experiment that we've done, we've also done this experiment in burned chambers. They concluded that the Wick effect explained away Dr. Bentley, Mrs. Reese, and all the other cases that we did the program. Keep that in mind as your viewers, your listeners, watch the video that you're going to play now about the amazing fire fatality of Danny Van Zandt in Oklahoma in 2013.
Okay, so I'm just going to put the video up there. I'm just going to mute myself and then Larry there, and we'll just talk about this case then as well. So here it is there, folks.
A 3-hour meeting just wrapped up could give one sheriff insight about how a man mysteriously burned to death. 4029's Emily Maha found out why one expert thinks it could be a case of spontaneous human combustion. It's a story you'll only see on 4029.
Spontaneous combustion is when a person is severely burned, even though a heat source is not present. That may have been what happened to Danny Van Zant last month.
In the classic case, the body is incinerated to powder, oftentimes more thoroughly, more completely than can be achieved in a crematorium retort.
Larry Arnold has been working on cases involving spontaneous human combustion for more than 4 decades. He says this case is different from those he has worked on in the past.
This is a real unexplained fire, and the local officials are open-minded enough to realize that this case falls outside the parameters of everything that they've been taught should be encountered at a fatal fire scene.
Arnold contacted the Sequoia County Sheriff's Department when he heard about the possible case of spontaneous human combustion.
This requires an incredibly intense, in-depth investigation.
While Sequoia County Sheriff Ron Lockhart would not allow 4029 into tonight's meeting, Arnold tells us what happened behind closed doors.
We discussed with the officials the characteristics of the burn scene, the specific details of the anatomical damage that was done to Mr. Van Zant himself. We're hoping while we were down here to get information about Mr. Van Zant's living pattern, his psychological profile, medications, if any, things like that.
Arnold says he is investigating 2 other cases of possible spontaneous combustion in Oklahoma. Emily Maha, 4029 News.
And Arnold tells 4029 he'll travel to Van Zant's home tomorrow. Van Zant's home tomorrow.
Apologies there if this sounds not that great there, or the reception's not that great. I know we're having heavy storm, well, there's heavy rain happening around the country at the moment there. But that was the case of Oklahoma there, and on 4029 channel. Can you tell us, Larry, more about that? Did you investigate it further?
We certainly did. From our end, that video froze up. We don't know what your audience got to see. But to recap it real quickly, on February 18, 2013, Danny Van Zant was discovered to have been burned in a most unusual fashion in his home outside Muldrow, Oklahoma. This is in Sequoia County in eastern Oklahoma. We got a tip to the case. We called immediately, and they said, "Yep, Larry, we know about your research. We're kind of confused about this. You're welcome to come down and help us look into this." So we started booking flights, and then a blizzard hit, so we postponed the trip for a little bit of time, but we did get down a couple weeks after the initial incident. Met with the sheriff, county sheriff, Ron Lockhart, met with the fire crews who responded to this fire, spoke to lots of people, desperately tried to meet with and discuss at great length the history of Danny Van Zant with his next of kin. That we were not successful in doing. But quite succinctly, on that morning, Monday morning, February 18, 2013, Danny Van Zant was found to be burned almost wholly to powder in his basically sitting room, kitchen, living room in a small home. A highly combustible environment, by the way. Fire was incredibly localized to his body. In this case, he left behind a little more than did Dr. Bentley and Mary Weiser. Danny Van Zant's remains consisted of his head, neck, and the very upper part of his shoulders. His hands remained intact, as did his wrist bones, including the pocket watch of one of the wrists. His 2 lower legs were found. One leg was found below the hole through which most of his body burned. His other foot was standing upright on the floor next to the hole through which most of his body incinerated. One of the naysayers, Mark Benecki, a renowned forensic biologist, argues against SHC when he says that there is no known case in which internal parts of a body are burned more completely than our external parts. His reasoning is that if this was indeed a fire of internal origin, i.e. spontaneous human combustion or sudden human cremation, you would find external body parts perhaps, but certainly you would find even more internal body parts because they're hard to burn. Well, in the Van Zandt case, he left behind his heart, but no pancreas, no liver, no other internal organs, according to the medical examiner's report that we do have. So the very fire scene that Danny Van Zandt left behind negates Dr. Benecki's argument against SHC. In fact, it confirms the classic definition of these amazing fire scenes that this phenomenon, albeit quite rare, does in fact happen. Sheriff Lockhart was willing to go on camera, and this was part of the segment that you attempted to play. He suggested, based on the description of the fire scene that he himself witnessed, that this certainly fit the parameters of what history has called spontaneous human combustion. Well, as soon as he made that supposition, you can imagine the grief, the ridicule, and the derision that Sheriff Lockhart endured. Firefighters aren't supposed to say those three words because officially it can't happen. What his critics did not realize when they rebuked and ridiculed Sheriff Lockhart was that before he was elected sheriff to Sequoia County, he had worked for 2 decades as an arson investigator.
Okay.
He knew what to expect at a fatal fire scene, and what he encountered at the Van Zandt fire was not in any way typical. As we said, we talked to the firefighters as well when we were in Oklahoma for several days. Chief Russell told us flat out, this is a direct quote, "This fire began and ended at the body." There was no accelerant, no other significant heat or flame damage aside from being focused where the body immolated and burned through the hole in Mr. Van Zandt's living kitchen roof. No accelerants were identified, no odor of noxious burned flesh. The family was quite distraught that something paranormal or bizarre was being attributed to the death of their kin. But history allows that to be made. He fits what history has defined classically as spontaneous human combustion.
As you were
The
saying,
mystery of how
sorry, go ahead, Larry.
the mystery of how this happened remains.
As I was just going to say, there in some cultures, and it might be described as, you know, as in linked to the devil or something like that. I don't know. In some cultures, you know more than me, like, you know, and probably that's something spontaneous like that happening, or something like being struck by lightning. People would term as being an act of God as well, you know. I suppose some people would term it that. And Paul makes a good point there, I suppose, and he says there, as you explained with several of the cases, why are legs left? Why the ends of the limbs left?
It's a great observation, and it raises a profound question about these fires. There are always exceptions in the body of literature and in the case histories of this phenomenon. In our book ABLAZE, we've got we now have in our fire files about 500 cases that fit the definition. They run the gamut from people who survived partial spontaneous combustion to the classic cases of Dr. Bentley, Mary Reeser, Mr. Van Zandt, and scores of others. If the body were wholly consumed, and for all we know, this may indeed happen, but if the body were completely ashened, the wind would come along and blow the ashes away, and we never know that somebody at that location burned so completely. What allows us to identify these remarkable cases as involving humans is the fact that extremities often are left intact, that the lower leg, the hands, the upper shoulders, or head sometimes will remain behind to say, yep, what was in between belonged also to a human being, once alive, now bizarrely burned to powder. The reason we think this happens, at least in some of the cases, is that the focus of the energy, whatever that energy is, that immolates the body from within to without, occurs in the solar plexus area of the body, the lower abdominal region, and that energy radiates out like a fireball of a diameter of about 2 feet, 1.5 feet. What is beyond the radius of that human fireball, if you will, escapes incineration. So if the locus of the energy is in the lower abdominal region or the chest cavity, and it has a limited radius, What is beyond the radius will remain intact. So hence we get a lower leg or the shoulders and head in many of the cases, but not all of them. As we said, there's an exception to every rule if there is a body of rules to this phenomenon. It's a very bizarre and very difficult to research and document subject.
Yeah, so like some cases, you said there was no limbs left at all there, and in some, like I just said, in Oklahoma, and with the Cinder Woman there, they're quite different as well. We're just going to come to Mick O'Driscoll. Hi, Mick. How you doing? Says, hi, Larry. Interesting stuff. We might just touch upon that. What's your theory or theories as to what actually caused it?
We've looked at all kinds of theories. In our book, ABLAZE, we discuss and present to the reader at least 120 different theories that may have various degrees of merit to attempting to explain these incredible human energy emanations. We like theories, or we like ideas that involve Kundalini, which is an like quasi-electrical energy that runs up and down the spinal column. We've spoken to individuals who have had Kundalini arousal experiences, and they talk to us about the incredible thermal energies that they feel inside their bodies when this is happening to them. We look at geography, and in the United Kingdom, and this may roll over into your homeland of Ireland as well, we found a cartographic pattern to many of these bizarre fire scenes. Most of them can be connected by straight alignments, bringing up to those of you who know about the ley lines, the alignments of megalithic sites. We think this is an overlay type of phenomenon involving strange fires. We do not believe that these fires can be explained as an oxidizing type combustion, what happens when you strike a match or light a gas burner. But the body is an electrical system, and the electrical potential in the billions, if not quadrillions of cells in the human body, if that electrical potential were to be released simultaneously, we speculate that the body can literally short itself out in electrical malfunction. We mentioned the cartography, the geography of these fires. We've looked at quantum physics to look for clues or an explanation. We've come up with the hypothetical existence of a particle that we call the pyrotron, which again gets a lot of ridicule and dismissal. But particle physicists are still discovering things. In fact, this past week we read about a new discovery that may throw the entire standard model of the universe into question. So there's a lot of things that's happening at the subatomic level that our scientists don't yet recognize. Those are just a couple of our theories.
I just go on to Derek there. Hi, Derek there. He says, hi, I have you books out there on this. I've heard a few cases in Ireland a few years ago. We're going to touch on that shortly after the next video there, Derek. So we're going to come to the Irish cases soon. And I'm going to show the book at the end of the show there that Larry ABLAZE. I'm going to show that, and maybe Larry wants to talk a bit about that as well. Adrian says, Larry, do you think spontaneous human combustion could explain some missing person cases? Also, do you know, is there some way to avoid spontaneous combustion? It's such a frightening concept. Yeah, that's a good point there, Adrian, as well. Is there any way you can, I suppose the first one about missing people there?
To the missing person case, absolutely. Yep. If this has happened when there's no one around to witness it or to encounter it within a few hours, if this is an episode that happened outdoors, and they do happen outdoors, the wood could come along and just blow the dust away. As to are there ways to avoid it, that's a very provocative question. The only answer that we've come up with in our decades of research so far to address that is this: maintain a healthy diet, a healthy mental attitude, and the odds of encountering this extraordinarily rare phenomenon will be even less, will be more in your favor to avoid it.
Yeah, I what we're going to actually, this video probably just ties in with this now there, like this is going to be, this video now is from the case of Fred Baker, and he was partially I've got to let the video do itself there, like, but Fred Baker will explain it as well there, and Larry will explain what happened afterwards there. So this is from the Unexplained Files there, and this is the account of Fred Baker.
Frank Baker is a decorated Vietnam War veteran. He has 2 Purple Hearts and a gallantry medal. But his closest brush with death was not on any battlefield. It was right here in Vermont. This is the first time he's spoken about the horrific events of June 1995.
We were getting ready for fishing. We were sitting on the couch the day before the Derby. Everything was great. Pete was sitting next to me. We were having one hell of a time, and all of a sudden,
it was the damnedest thing I've ever seen. Frank was freaking out and making me freak out.
I was in sheer panic. All I could do was try to fight it. I was petrified. I had no idea what was taking place with my body. None.
Eventually, Pete and Frank managed to extinguish the flames and get Frank to a doctor. For Frank, this was only the beginning, and the medical profession were no help.
The doctor was completely baffled, and he said, looking at it, Frank, this burned from the inside out. And he said, I've never, ever seen anything like this.
Yet Frank was nowhere near any source of heat or flame.
I wasn't smoking, there were no flames around, there was no lights on, no microwaves. All that was coming in was the sun from the far end of the house when this happened.
Frank Baker appears to fit all the criteria for survival of partial spontaneous human combustion, and he's had to deal with it. He's had to come to terms with something that was said to be impossible, something that could not happen.
And if you've noticed something there, if the video is not freezed over, that's to do with probably going on to something extraordinary. I've just taken a candle over there, might have helped actually the video from stopping to freeze. So if you noticed it behind me there, that was the case of Fred Baker there, Larry. Can you tell us more about that?
Let us correct the name. It is Frank Baker.
Oh,
F-R-A-N-K. Frank Baker.
Sorry, no.
But he was sitting with his friend Fred. In the summer of 1975, they were both getting ready to go to a fishing derby, when suddenly Frank's body erupted in what both of them described as open flame combustion. No surrounding external ignition materials available. His body just appeared to burst into flame. Fred responded immediately and started beating out the flames, and blessedly and fortuitously, that worked this time. Doesn't always seem to do that way, but this time it did work. And they both were mystified, looking at each other, trying to ascertain what the hell had just happened in their mutual shared presence. Frank went to his physician, looking for an answer, of course, and the physician couldn't give him one, had no idea. And again, medical professionals tend not to know about this subject. A few years later, when both gentlemen were in a boat in the middle of a lake, once again fishing together, this happened a second time, and Frank was once again able to rescue his friend Frank from possibly becoming a Dr. Bentley in a boat in the middle of a lake. Frank is a decorated Vietnam veteran, 2 Purple Hearts. He's not the kind of person that would make up a story like this. This is something that we always have to be careful about with these survivor cases. We've had the privilege of now interviewing some 24 people that have experienced partial spontaneous human combustion, we believe. There's always the chance that people are making up these stories for notoriety, but in Frank Baker's case, we have, at this point, no reason whatsoever to doubt his credibility as he's told the story. Remarkable and seemingly incredulous as it is. The first victim that we were able to identify as a survivor happened back in 1974. His name is Jack Angel. In his case, he went to physicians for treatment because his burn was so severe that his right forearm was charred to a crisp, burned to the bone, and the damage was so severe the forearm had to be amputated. In the process of doing so, his physicians, some of whom we've interviewed, said the burns were electrical in nature and, quote unquote, internal in origin.
Okay.
That is, Jack Angel, probably just as did Frank Baker, burned from the inside out. That, by definition and by concept, once again, we will argue to anyone, meets the criterion for spontaneous human combustion.
Yeah, so if it's happened to people, the start of it, then they have first-hand evidence as well to what's happened with the cases of SHC. G. McAvoy says, I've heard of one case of combustion, and it really happens 100%. We're going to touch on now soon about the Irish cases there, so stay tuned, folks there. Jenny says, I don't know if evidence is destroyed in a fire. Will we ever know why it happens?
That's a great question, and it's one that we've pondered now for 40 years, ever since our experimentation with alcohol soaked tissue didn't incinerate itself to powder. So much of this phenomenon seems to extend well beyond what mainstream orthodox science is capable of reproducing in the laboratory. If there are experiments that can replicate the fire scene and the conditions that existed when Dr. Bentley and Mary Reeser and Danny Van Zandt expired, we'd love to see that done. Not saying it can't happen, but at this point, we're not able to fathom the mechanism, the chemistry that will allow that to happen in the situation and circumstances in which these fires themselves occurred.
And I know, and Jenny just touched upon there, because Jenny's into the phenomenon as well. She says, I read the last death of SHC was a Michael Faherty, 76, who died in his home in Galway, December 2010. And we're going to talk about that now. It might be a bit of a sensitive case as well there, to some that might be watching there as well. But can you explain more about what that case? It's well known in the spontaneous human combustion field, the case of Michael Faherty.
Yeah. Real succinctly, this happened December 22, 1910 in Galway. When we went to your country in 2016, we tried to track down the location. It was incredibly difficult to find. And bless his heart, a taxi driver stopped by, looked, noticed us being perplexed. He offered to find the location for us, and even he had trouble finding Mr. Flaherty's home. But we eventually got there, did not access it. Again, it was locked up. We were there 6 years after it happened. Succinctly, a neighbor noticed heavy smoke coming from Mr. Flaherty's house early that morning, notified the Gardaí and the fire departments. They responded. And here's where things get dicey and not real clear to us. The Irish media called us that morning to get our comment about it. And as we told them then, and we will tell your listeners now, until we know all the facts that we can amass, we will make no determination one way or the other. That's how good science should be done. And we have been unsuccessful in getting the details of this case. Perhaps and hopefully, some of your listeners will know more about this case than we presently know and will contact us about it. But here's the story as we understand it. The damage was limited to Mr. Flaherty's body. It was totally burnt, quote unquote. Damage relegated to the body and the flooring below the body and the ceiling directly above the body. There was apparently an open fire in Mr. Flaherty's home, but the officials ruled out a connection between the open fire and the fire that consumed Mr. Flaherty himself. The burns were so severe that the medical examiner, the pathologist, said that the damage precluded determining the precise cause of death. So the amount of combustion damage to Mr. Flaherty's body must have been intense, but we just don't know the precise details. What brought this to the media attention was soon thereafter, Dr. McLaughlin, the Galway coroner, looked at the evidence, did some research in forensic textbooks, and decided that this fire death met the criteria for spontaneous human combustion and declared it to be so. not surprisingly, unleashing a firestorm. We talked to the coroner at that time. He was unwilling to give us further details, suggesting that we wait until he conducted and concluded his investigation, which is fine and fair with us. He promised to give us the results when he was done. When we were there in 2016, we made the efforts before we left to come to Ireland to prearrange an interview with him while we were there, looking for all the details that we would require to ascertain the true nature of this particular fire fatality. And Mr. McLaughlin was quite terse and angry with us. We don't know that we did anything to, upset him. It may have been a reaction that so many people ridiculed him that he just wanted to dismiss the connection that he made between a fire fatality and giving it the official auspices of endorsing spontaneous human combustion.
True.
So if any of your listeners know more about this case, somebody who worked for Garda at the time who knows about this, please contact us. We are eager to understand more completely than we presently do the nature and the facts of Mr. Flaherty's fiery demise. Mr. McLaughlin at the time did make a mistake in his public pronouncements. He said that this was the first case of SHC in the country of Ireland. We would disagree with that. Back in 1780, in our book ABLAZE, we mentioned this case. There was an incident that occurred. Got to get our notes here. Here we go. This happened in 1780 in Limerick, at the 5 Pounds Almshouse. And the victim in question was either a Mrs. Peacock, P-E-A-C-O-C-K, or Peacoke, P-O-C-O-K-E. Two different spellings in the historical citations that we have. But here's the story. Around 2 a.m., a lodger at the almshouse complained to the innkeeper that he didn't like the nature of the room service that he had just encountered. Was that a justified complaint? The innkeeper begrudgingly went upstairs to the lodger's room and found on the floor a badly burned body and a hole in the ceiling above that lodger's room. Innkeeper went upstairs into the room that was above this lodger's room, expecting to find Mrs. Peacock there. Did not find her, but found a hole, the other side of the hole that was in the lodger's room below. That lodger said that he had been awakened by a woman who fell through that hole, quote unquote, red as copper, aflame, that almost landed on his bed. Certainly a justifiable complaint. Sadly, history doesn't tell us how that complaint was resolved by the innkeeper. When we were in Ireland, we went through the local newspapers in Ireland. Unfortunately, the library in Limerick had an incomplete collection of their newspaper. And of all the issues that we were able to look through, we could not find reference to this particular case. We did not have the opportunity to go over to Dublin, which had a complete selection of the cases. So if anybody is listening who has access to those newspaper archives in Dublin and wants to do a little archival research for us, have at it. Let us know what you find. We'd like to know more information about that. We have a third case from Ireland, if we may. And this happened just a few days, almost to the week after Michael Flaherty died in Glasgow. This happened up in County Donegal to a lady named Elizabeth McLaughlin. Curious, similar name as to the coroner down in with the Flaherty case in Glasgow. Again, we don't know the full details. We did not have the time when we were in Ireland to make that extended trip from Castle Esk outside of Donegal all the way up to the northern tip of County Donegal, where this case ostensibly occurred. But we did talk to a next of kin who said that there was talk of spontaneous human combustion at the time, and he likened the death of his relative to being a death by SHC. Okay. We do have a quote from a pathologist who was involved in that case legally. And of course, he wrote off SHC as a myth, but he did acknowledge that the nature of the burn injury to Elizabeth at the time was such that it did cause him to think about SHC, which we find quite provocative. So again, if your listeners know more about that case from Upper Donegal and called Dognon, if we're pronouncing that correctly, that happened December 31st, 2010. Let us know. Eager to hear from you.
Okay, it's interesting because there's a sort of pattern as well. I've just noticed that just myself there as well. There with these cases there, they really happen suddenly, and as in like just the woman, as it was described, the gentleman saw the woman coming down, screaming, falling down the floor, There's no chance for these people to actually acknowledge that like you'd expect them to move from the spot where the spontaneous combustion happens. You expect them to be, I suppose, make themselves be seen or try and reach for help. That's what I'm probably trying to say. There, it's an unusual, it's kind of common kind of thing that's happening. Just go. Sorry, go ahead, Larry.
On that point, as we said earlier, in this subject that we're discussing with you tonight, the cases are so diverse and so atypical one to another. We cannot, but in the most generalized terms, say anything specifically that applies to all the cases. To your point, we actually do have cases from the historical literature where people have experienced this phenomenon and lived long enough to suffer, as one would expect from a normal intense burn injury, cry out for help, but in the end they succumb to their severe combustible injury.
I know I know as Frank Baker as well, there was lucky that he had his friend close by as well. Derek says, hi Larry, did you ever hear that there is a possibility that it could be acid building up in your system? I don't know if that's acid. I have heard theories that it could be possibility. So
if Derek is asking about acid buildup in the body, it's possible. We've looked at certain biochemical avenues by which this phenomenon might occur. Niacin is one vitamin that seems to be present in a few of the cases, may offer a contributing factor. Again, the problem is with researching this, and indeed in looking for an explanation or explanations, because we do not believe there is a single causative mechanism that can explain all the cases, because as we said now repeatedly, they are so varied in nature. But the problem is these fires are so poorly investigated by the initial responders, by the local fire and police departments. We actually have instances where we know the local authorities try to literally push the ashes under a rug, rather than deal with the confounding evidence that was confronting their own eyes and sensibilities. Sure. As we said in the Oklahoma case, we desperately wanted to meet with the next of kin and sit down with them to learn as much as we could about Mr. Van Zandt's medical history, biological history, emotional history, psychological background, looking for any factor that we might be able to link to some other key cases that would help us come closer to an understanding of what exactly is the mechanism or mechanisms that engender and produce these incredible human incinerations. Sadly, it's been an effort that so far has been fraught with frustration and rejection. Maybe we'll have the good fortune someday to find a case where everybody wants an answer and will work with us, and the fire and police departments will openly cooperate with us, as did the Oklahoma case with the county officials in Sequoia. Very cooperative, very open-minded to us, very helpful. But without the information that we needed from the next of kin, we're stymied in learning more information about exactly what factors could be present in these fire fatalities.
As you said, like an understanding is prevention and might stop some other cases happening in the future as well. Adrian says, I wonder how this happens, but how it has never been caught on camera when everyone has a camera on their phone these days. But I suppose the same could be said about UFOs and spirits. Well, Adrian, I wouldn't want to be around you if it happened to me. I know it out that way. I wouldn't expect you to ring or try and get a cloth, but instead of videoing me. To that point, and it's an observation that we shared too, and someday it will happen. But we are told, again, based on our research in the obscure arcane medical literature, back in, if memory serves, in the 1930s, there's an incident in Italy involving the name eludes us momentarily. It was a lady who, under hospitalization, was filmed to exhibit blue-colored flames, probably electrical in nature, emanating from her bosom. Oh, we have never been able to find that footage. We'd love to see it. It's got to be incredibly provocative. Has someone captured a recent case of SHC happening on their cell phone and is too terrified to release it? You can go on the internet and find all kinds of recreations, but we have yet to find a genuine, believable, credible
filmed recent case. Speaking of which, the critics of ours have argued repeatedly that the photographs that we showed you earlier of Dr. Bentley and the scores of other photographs that we have amassed across the planet in our decades of research are hoaxes, are frauds, or are clever camera angles that conceal the existence of the remaining internal organs that, as we said, Dr. Benecke insists must be present to rule out the reality of spontaneous human combustion. Let us tell your audience tonight, and we will stake every dollar we have in the bank account on this statement. The photograph that we showed you, the photographs that you're showing your audience and that we have in our collection are not hoaxes. They are not photoshopped. These are real, genuine, historical documents with provenance that we know that depict a real, bona fide scientific and medical mystery. Deal with it.
And as you was just saying about the woman with the, just going back to that with the flames there is a case of the pyrokinesis as well there. People, what pyrokinesis is generating flames through an extra sense to create flames, or turn a candle out, the power to do so there. So that's a completely different subject altogether there. Paul, but yeah, I'll get details there. If you've got any information there, Paul, send it through. Jenny says, I would hope if someone bursts into flames, that the last thing they would do is take out their mobile phones. But these days, you just don't know. But then again, I suppose the CCTV cameras and as well and all that, you know. Adrian says, true, Jenny, but things I see videos of that occur in public, you wouldn't believe.
We can empathize with that last statement. And to Jenny's comment, let us add this in because she just triggered a recall. We have seen video, genuine, credible video of spontaneous combustion happening to humans. But this is a result of lithium batteries badly designed or failing in cell phones or in other electronic devices that these people have in their pockets. And they were bursting the flame. Now that is technically spontaneous human combustion, but in this case, we have an external identifiable ignition source. So while the person is burned spontaneously, it's not a fire that originated from within the body. These are external ignition sources. So it has been videoed in the broadest conceptual sense.
Yeah, and that's to do with your phone. So make sure I got one of those phones, Larry, that I could throw against the wall and it'll come back to me 10 times. It's one of those old phones, but the battery lasts for about 2 weeks. I haven't got any of those modern phones there, but I know that they can as well. They've been returned back faulty. I think it was a few years ago there. Samsung. I'm not too sure the company.
We had here in Harrisburg now, maybe 2 years ago, a fatal fire that was caused by a lithium-ion battery that ignited in the child's hoverboard. Burned the house down and killed the kid.
And as you explained earlier on, changing subject there, houses are full of flammable things that can go up and fire there, and it's just extraordinary how surroundings seem to be intact in these cases. Jenny says, I would believe you, Adrian, and Bridget Burke says, as you say, could be down to everyone's medical history as well. Yeah, so if you knew the records, then it could prevent something in the future as well. We did a poll there, Larry. I'm just going to show the results there. So we asked people there, do you believe that spontaneous human combustion, the combustion of a living or recently deceased person without an apparent external force can occur? And results were 50% said yes. And why is it getting hot in there? Sorry, that's just a slight joke. I know I should be joking. And 25% said maybe, some like it hot. And 25% said no, although I am hot and hot looking. So that was just me messing around there. But so people tend to do believe there, like, you know, in SHC there. I suppose people more open-minded. I suppose it's like religion and we all go into court and we all put an oath on the Bible, but when it comes to spontaneous human combustion, then we can't think a plan to actually include it in the teaching of to medical practitioners and coroners as well. And, what do you think of that, Larry? I suppose because it's happening in Ireland, people probably voting in Ireland. That'd probably
we have taught now for more than 2 decades annually at the local community college here to the advanced fire science course, our research on the subject. And the reaction we get is quite intriguing and quite varied. Some of the students are amazed, fascinated, throw a lot of good questions at us, obviously looking for a greater understanding. Unfortunately, the flip side is that a lot of the students are totally blasé, disinterested, and probably don't want to think about it, which is what happens often to us in our research as we talk to fire investigators, arson investigators. Remember one story, we came from an amazing case outside of Philadelphia, Helen Conway, who burned up in an incredibly short period of time. Again, countering the claims that these are low heat smoldering fires. In the Conway case, she left behind, sitting in her chair, a largely incinerated body that happened within a period of no more than 6 minutes, documented by sitting down with the first responders in that case. After we left talking with the fire marshal about that case, we drove a few miles east of downtown Philadelphia, where our records indicated several similar cases had occurred earlier in history. We went to the Philadelphia Fire Department's new headquarters, sat down with one of their chief fire investigators and said, we have these names, here are the dates, approximate locations, we'd like to see your fire files for research purposes. His response immediately was, well, I don't have anything to show you, Larry, because when we asked why, he said, these things don't happen. Therefore, we can't have files about these cases. We put the photographs of Mary Reeser, Dr. Bentley, and this new case, Helen Conway, on his desk, gave him the synopsis of the details of each and said, look, you're the expert, we're the researcher. From your years of experience in fighting and investigating fires, if you're called out to one of these, a fire that looked like these photographs, to a fire scene like this, what would your reaction be? Help us understand. What would you do? His response, we shall never forget, quote unquote, I'd go out, I'd get drunk, I'd forget about it. At that point, he told us to pick up our materials, and he literally escorted us down the elevator, across the hallway, and to the sidewalk, and then turned away.
And that's what we're dealing with people in our higher society there. I'm just going to touch on this next question. It was probably actually the next question I was going to ask you there about and Bridget's just come across it there, and she says, as you say, could it be down? Oh no, sorry, no, that next one down. Sorry, Bridget. Can I ask? Does it happen to animals? Does it happen in the animal kingdom? That was the next question I was going to ask.
Yeah. And you and we discussed this last night in prepping for this. Yes, according to our research and the research of 2 other investigators, Jenny Randalls and Peter Howell, yes, it can and does happen in the animal community. So we're not dealing only with SHC, but SAC, spontaneous animal combustion. We have cases, one from November 1986 in the Anwer Lodge in London. The residents had a pet cat named Peppy. One afternoon, they heard a loud, sudden, terrific bang, their description, and then noticed, quote unquote, blue flames coming from the body of their pet cat. In Ontario, Tora Island, Ontario, Canada, back in late 1891, there was a poltergeist type outbreak at the Robert Dawson farm. Poltergeist activity that included not only bangs and slams and levitating and teleportation of objects, but spontaneous fires. This is a rare subset of the poltergeist phenomena. But in that case, their pet kitten suddenly inflamed, and the dress that was worn by Robert's daughter, Jenny, spontaneously combusted while she was wearing the dress. We have a couple of other cases. In fact, Ivan Sanderson, the renowned naturalist, was hiking in the remote woods in West Virginia and wrote about this discovery that he made in his book, Investigating the Unexplained, back in 1972. He came upon a badly incinerated opossum in the middle of the woods, no evidence of human intervention around. It did not look to him as a naturalist that this animal had been burned by a lightning strike. And indeed, lightning strike victims burn in a very different way than do Dr. Bentley and Mrs. Reeser, et cetera, et cetera. We have instances of sheep, dogs, cats, turtles, escargot, and possibly even exploding birds. That would fit the general definition concept of spontaneous animal combustion. Yeah, it gets weirder and weirder.
Yeah, and you could touch upon that as well with poltergeist cases there. And I suppose that's probably why I don't know why some people will probably touch away from kind of the spontaneous human combustion, because they might think, as we were saying about religious and spiritual side, paranormal, we might link it to that as well, and that's probably, but you know, it's something that has to be investigated more. I suppose, I don't know, it all must be reading my mind, telepathy. And we're going to go on to precognition soon. Paul O'Brien said, what is the most recent? I was going to ask you there, is there any recent cases recently, or has it fallen down there, Larry?
We have alleged cases from India, happened to very young infants. Several cases alleged to have occurred fairly recently, last couple of years in various parts of Africa. We have not been able to personally investigate those cases. We have been unable to obtain the kind of detailed information that will allow us to make an assessment of those cases. To the question specifically, the most recent case that we are willing to stake our reputation on as a researcher of this phenomena, and the conclusion that we can make of it, happened in February 2013 to Mr. Danny Van Zandt in Oklahoma.
Okay. So we're going to... I'm going to have a little break now. We're going to go on to the next subject there. So if it's really fascinating there, Larry. It's really, well, it's something that's not really talked about there, and it's great to talk about it now. We do have a quiz, folks, there. So you have a chance to enter our mini draw and Halloween mega draw. So you have a choice of 6 locations, but the first thing I want you to do, I need the first person to type the word Cinder Woman, which is C-I-N-D-E-R, and woman, W-O-M-A-N. I need the first person to type the word Cinder Woman, and you have a chance to go into the draw there, the quiz. Well, it's not a quiz there, it's a sort of, well, it's a type of quiz there. Like, you have a choice of 6 locations to pick from. Paul, just get it in there if you could get it in correctly.
Looks like Irene got it.
Irene got it. I'm sorry, Paul. Sorry, Paul. Irene got it. Hey, Irene's from California. Hi, Irene there. So, Irene, so there's a choice of 6 places, Irene: a ghost ship, fairy fort, castle, well, island, and mortuary. If you can pick one of those locations, at the end of the show, then we'll see if you're in with the chance to go into the draw. So if you can just type back one of those locations: a ghost ship, fairy fort, castle, well, island, or mortuary. Larry, would you like to pick a place? Pick one of those as well? You have a choice as well.
Let's go for the morgue.
I was going to say that. I bet you would pick that one. I knew, God, everyone's got telepathy's working tonight. No, lads. And Irene's picked the castle there. Okay, perfect there. Okay, so we're going to touch into the next subject, which is precognition there, and it's to do with the 3 Mile Island. And Larry will explain it more, and it's to do with a nuclear reactor. So tell me first there, Larry. This is a nuclear reactor meltdown, but can you tell us how did you envisage the meltdown at the reactor?
In the 1970s, literally almost in our backyard, 15 miles from our office here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Metropolitan Edison was building a 2-reactor nuclear power plant, 3 Mile Island 1 and 3 Mile Island 2. Unit 1 came online first. It really has a pretty good safety record all around. Unit 2, we had concerns about specifically, but about nuclear power in general. We met with our legislators at the time, had a tour of the island while Unit 2 was under construction. We were so apprehensive about Unit 2 that in July of 1978, we wrote an article for the local newspaper called "Tomorrow's Disaster at 3 Mile Island, Nuclear Meltdown." It was published in August of that year, to great ridicule and anger by Metropolitan Edison. They thought we were unduly alarming the public because the article described a Class 9 meltdown at Unit 2. Class 9, if you don't know, is the most serious category that the United States regulators assign to a nuclear power plant. It's catastrophic. Metropolitan Edison and defenders of nuclear power said, nope, basically can't happen. It's Class 9s just don't happen. Well, 8 months after the article was published, on the morning of March 28, 1979, Unit 2 went Class 9. It almost melted. Well, in fact, it did melt down. It just did not breach fully containment at that time. When we heard about the unfolding disaster, we grabbed our notebook and went immediately to 3 Mile Island, because now we had probable vindication that the precognitive experience and the writing that we did 9 months earlier was not going to manifest and be manifesting in our conscious reality. That's indeed what happened. Writing the article was very quick and sudden for us, almost, if we may use the word, spontaneous. Usually when we write, it's a very laborious process. We are detailed word for word. We want every word to be accurate and to be right. This article almost wrote itself. We did it in about a 2-day turnaround and submitted it to the newspaper that published it. It's been our belief in researching various types of Fortean phenomena over the decades that oftentimes major disasters will have precognition manifesting throughout the local population. So we started making inquiries. Were we the only one who had a precognitive experience that 3 Mile Island Unit 2 was going to go Class 9? The answer to that is no. We uncovered several dozen people who had premonitions as long ago as a few years before March 28th, 79, that something bad was going to happen at this specific nuclear power plant. What we discovered in that research was that the closer we came to the actual manifestation of the accident was a greater number, a significant increase in the number of precognitive experiences that people were having in this area. That something was going to go horribly awry. Most of those experiences were in anomalousy, in the dream state, and analyzing those experiences, those insights, and looking at the chronology of them resulted in our first book, The Parapsychological Impact of the Accident at 3 Mile Island. We would later work with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on this matter in particular, as one of their officials told us, we don't care how we can prevent an accident, we just want to prevent it. And if people's precognitive dreams or forewarnings or apprehensions about a nuclear power plant accident, we can utilize that to look for problems, potential issues that we need to address and fix, so be it.
It's so interesting because, you know, there's been major disasters that have happened around the world, like, and even in the past, historic records, there's mines in Wales. That was a disaster there. I think it was a school close by, and that was envisaged that would happen, as well as people. Also, one of the most famous ones, the Titanic. People were having dreams as well as that beforehand. Can you tell us the aftermath? What happened? Was there anybody injured, or was it still an ongoing? It's still ongoing.
Yeah, it depends how you define ongoing. Was anyone injured? Officially, no. Officially, not enough radiation was emitted to cause any kind of biological detriment or injury to the surrounding population. We were involved, however, in the Pennsylvania State Department, Health Department's epidemiological study, and we asked a few questions on the side, because we had also heard that several people were experiencing the morning of the accident a strong metallic taste in the air. And that is, we understand, indicative of high levels of radiation, particularly iodine. So although the official historical record says levels were not injurious, given that radiation detectors actually went off scale the morning of the accident, truthfully, no one knows just how much radiation escaped that day or in the days following. Is the accident ongoing? Both Units 1 and Unit 2 at 3 Mile Island are now mothballed. They are both offline. Obviously, Unit 2 never reopened. Unit 1 has been taken offline. But now 3 Mile Island is an active nuclear waste disposal repository. It was never designed to be one. So is the accident still ongoing? In our view, the answer still is yes, it is still unfolding. And
as well as precognition, there, have you obviously have you delved into telepathy and clairvoyance as well? Does the Parascience International deal with that as well?
After the accident, Parascience International did set up a precognition hotline. Anybody could call in at any hour of the day or night, and they did, to give to us what they thought might be an insight into a future disaster. It never produced any results that would lead us to the kind of information and database that we obtained for the 3 Mile Island event itself. There are probably other, we since disbanded that activity, but we still have an interest in it. And there are probably other sources available now on the internet where people are actively collecting precognitive experiences, looking for the same kinds of patterns that we discovered existed here in Pennsylvania in 1979, 1978.
And as you said there, with has there been any accounts that you don't have to, you could say no comment if you want. Is there any accounts that you've foreseen but haven't occurred? And or is there time and distance as well? Is there some that's really happened in the future that you've
well, let's see, what can we say here? In the general broadest sense, climate warming of the planet is real. We predict the results of this are going to be imminent and catastrophic in the near future. If we stop burning carbon fuels tomorrow, it's not going to change the pattern that is already unfolding around the planet. Count that as a long-term prediction.
Yeah, because probably we're going to touch on to another subject now, which is going to be interesting, the Pennsylvania Triangle and the Bermuda Triangle there, and it's kind of scary stuff in some ways there as well there. So I'm just going to go through a few. Adrian says this is to do with spontaneous combustion. Thank you for your insight, line preparation for the evening. Fascinating stuff. That's from Adrian. No worries, Adrian. And Paul says, I always lose, but that's he's gone for Ireland. No, I meant Ireland as in a solitary bit of land. Paul, that was for the quiz there. So we're going to touch on now. This is interesting. Now, this is the Pennsylvania Triangle and stroke the Bermuda Triangle. Can you tell us that you made a discovery? Was it back in 1977 with was it the Bermuda Triangle or the Pennsylvania Triangle?
That was the Bermuda Triangle. We had the privilege of collaborating with an expedition that was led by Dr. Zink. We sailed from Fort Lauderdale in a 41-foot Morgan ketch across the Gulf Stream. We were given the helm for most of that crossing. Our first time on open water, and we made it across. We didn't lose time. We didn't get abducted. We all made it to Bimini safe and sound. But then during several days of submarine archaeology in the area, what we were looking for specifically at the time was to try to relocate a pillar of apparent stone that was submerged and had been photographed many years earlier, a pillar that appeared to exude a luminous emanation. We were trying to relocate that pillar in 1977. We did not find the pillar during that expedition. However, in meeting with a local fishing guide, Bonefish Sam, we made what we believe is a remarkable discovery that has, even to this day, gone largely unnoticed and unrecognized. I'm sure many, if not all of your listeners, know about the Bimini Road site, the J-shaped formation of alleged beach rock on the floor of the ocean off the shore of North Bimini. We dove on that site, and well, when we were there in '77, it did indeed look like a layer of beach rock on the floor of the ocean. But in meeting with Bonefish Sam, who is the world-renowned fishing guide at that time, he told us that decades earlier in his day as a fisherman in Bimini, he could not sail his boat, nor could the other fishermen in the area sail their boats over the Bimini Road site, which is now under, I think, about 27 feet of water. They had to sail around the site because the beach rock had stacked itself, or was stacked 10 tiers high off the ocean floor. Now, beach rock does not naturally form itself into a 10-tier layer of stacked rock like cement block would be placed. So our contention is that several decades ago, the Bimini Road was indeed a Bimini wall that had been dismantled, according to Bonefish Sam, for material to build a breakwater off the coast of Florida. If that is true, and we have no reason to doubt Bonefish Sam's credibility, then a key, vital, fascinating, important archaeological site was dismantled for debris.
Okay. So it's like a type of it was an archaeological site there, and this wasn't discovered before. It wasn't.
To our knowledge, 1977 was the first time Bonefish Sam told anyone publicly about his experience years earlier in sailing around the Bimini Wall.
And I suppose you met the apparatus there. We showed the ship there. Was it what type of? Did you just go down and did you scuba dive down and?
Yeah. This is solely a scuba and snorkeling expedition. We were looking for something else, and by happenstance and indirectly made this other, what to us is as fascinating, if even not more fascinating, discovery and revelation.
And it was is there any phenomena now that has come in that area of the Pennsylvania Triangle?
Well, the Pennsylvania Triangle is something wholly distinct from the Bermuda Triangle. There are still unusual electromagnetic phenomena we understand happening in the so-called Bermuda Triangle. And let us say this right up front. To our knowledge, this is a term that Ivan Sanderson, the naturalist that we talked to earlier, or referred to earlier with the burned possum, he's the one who basically coined the term Bermuda Triangle, and he posited that there were 11 other vortices that also produced strange phenomena, as he called them, funny things, around the world. There's nothing that we know that defines the Bermuda Triangle as a legitimate geometric triangle. It's just this big, large area, basically off the east coast of Florida, going up to Bimini and down to Puerto Rico, in which alleged strange things have happened. Some of the strangest do involve electromagnetic phenomena. When we sailed the Ketch across, our compass worked fine, but on other legs of Dr. Zink's various expeditions, the compasses did act inexplicably, bizarrely.
Yeah.
They would spin around, and we believe that the disappearance of Flight 19, we believe, is probably attributable to failed navigation equipment on those planes. Bruce
Flight
Gernon,
19 is the one on Devil's Triangle.
Right.
That's the Malaysian. Yeah. Sorry, that's
the classic Bermuda Triangle mystery, is Flight 19 disappearance. Bruce Gernon is a small plane pilot who's flown between Florida and Andros in the Bahamas multiple times. In 1970, when he was flying a brand new Beechcraft, he encountered a very strange storm that he said was like flying into a tunnel that had flying into a tunnel of corkscrews, and a hazy electronic fog enveloped his plane, and he claims that his little Beechcraft was able to fly about 2,000 miles an hour because he got to Florida from Andros much sooner than he normally would have gotten there. So it's kind of like a quasi-meteorological electromechanical phenomena that we believe does happen in this area of the planet repeatedly, and does produce strange phenomena, but we have no reason yet to look at more bizarre or Fortean attempted explanations than that. We'll stick with that for the moment.
I know, because I've got a pile of questions to do, like another vortices to do with Scott and the Antarctica, and to do with, I think it was there was the Malaysian flight a few years ago, and it was apparently went over the Devil's Triangle as well.
Right.
But there is a suggestion there, apparently, there that the magnetic field is weakening there, and it's shifting as well, a good few kilometers each year there. Do you think, as you mentioned, global warming, you don't have to answer this yourself there, do you think there's actually global warming is a separate issue there, but what actually is happening is the magnetic field is causing the different climate change and stuff that you saw in the Bermuda Triangle and Pennsylvania Triangle? Is it the magnetic field?
The magnetic field of the planet is definitely shifting. It moves all the time, but in recent years it seems to have made some rather rapid shifting that we think that is problematic. Connecting the magnetic field variations to phenomena in the Bermuda Triangle area. There could well be a correlation, but we don't have the technical scientific background to make a call on that.
It does keep you awake at night.
Yeah, it gives us more things to ponder and muse about. But we're an advocate years ago of Dr. Charles Hapgood and his book, The Path of the Pole. We believe that some of the main geological catastrophes that have afflicted this planet over its history has been caused by lithospheric displacements. And given that the ice caps, we believe, are going to rapidly deteriorate and melt away, it's going to shift the equilibrium balance of the planet, not only magnetically, but the geographic pole, the spin axis. We can anticipate some really serious geological events in the near future.
Yeah, no, just to leave it there, I suppose explain it. I suppose what I found out there was that the Earth will start to slow down, and the magnetic field go weaker, and there's some solar storms, and it's all going to be happiness. So,
yeah, the Earth's magnetic field has flipped 180 degrees, repeated throughout history. So, I mean, given how reliant our society today is on electronics, many of them are dependent on magnetic fields or can be disrupted by sudden geomagnetic bursts. If the magnetic field flips itself 180 degrees overnight or even quicker, our society is going to be in deep shit.
No, it is going to be.
Real trouble. Yeah, we won't be doing this with each other.
No. I'll just go through a few questions there or responses there. Adrian Honey says, just plain devil's advocate, I would think that if you look at everyone's premonitions, you could connect each one with a real life event. If you try hard enough, you can connect nearly any dream or premonition to real life events. I've heard of people predicting 2 giants will fall and suggesting they predicted 9/11, for example. I suppose it's in people's interpretation as well there, Adrian, I suppose. Yeah,
that's true. Adrian makes a fine point, and we do not quibble with it, except to say this: in the precognition that we did related to 3 Mile Island, it was very specific. It was not some nuclear power plant somewhere on the planet, somewhere at some time in the near future. In fact, when we wrote the article, we pinpointed almost to the day when that event was going to happen. Regrettably, in the final editing, we changed it just a bit, so we missed calling it to the day, but we were still really close to that point. Critical newspaper reviewers who looked at the article that we had published and spoke to us concluded that our article was about 90% accurate. That's a pretty high standard to meet.
That's a high percentage there. Derek Whelan says, I heard this case from my cousin in Florida. Did you hear that people had bad luck traveling? That I think it's that bad luck traveling off the coast of Florida, there, Pennsylvania. I think that's what Derek is on about there. I'm just going to go before we're going to go on to how you can contact people. I'm just going to show something as well, which is the book. Have you still got is there still available copies or e-copies for the book ABLAZE? I'll just show it now.
Thank you. First edition copies of ABLAZE are still available. It can either be purchased from Amazon or for you folks in Ireland who would like to get a signed first edition copy, write to us at the contact information that Adrian will give to you at the end of the program. The website is parascience.com. Email is parascience2@gmail. Get a hold of us and we'll be happy to send a book off to you, arrange shipping costs and all that kind of good stuff for you. It is an astonishing book, if we may humbly say so. It's
amazing.
About 400 some pages. You will find, and this is a guarantee that few authors can make on a nonfiction subject. If you have not read the book before, you will guaranteed read information about cases you heretofore did not know about.
It's amazing. And so yeah, if you'd like to contact Larry, just as he just mentioned, just reveal the contact details, even with the cases there recently in Ireland, or if you know of any others, other than just PM me or Larry as well with the contact details there. Larry, and it's really appreciated. What we're going to do is just do the quiz quickly there and just show the results of that, just to see if you're in the mini draw or the mega draw. This is something that we got on there just so that people watch us. So this is the you picked the mortuary there, the morgue there, Larry, and
yes.
Irene, you picked the castle. So let's see how it goes now. So choice of the ghost ship, 34 castle, Wells Island, and no luck with the mortuary on the castle. No luck there. Mini draw was the ghost ship and the 34. And Paul, if you stayed on and you got it correct, you would have got it right with the island there. You would have been in the Halloween mega draw there. So I'm sorry there, Larry, and sorry there, Irene, but there's other chances to get in there anyway there in the future there, Irene and Larry. Larry, what have you got? Have you got anything? I know you just I won't mention what's been happening, but have you got anything planned for the future for Parascience International?
Always looking for pyrophenomena cases, and just to bounce back a little bit, because you teased your listeners with the Pennsylvania Triangle of Ice. Let us real quickly address that. It'll bring us full circle in a way. We made a discovery in the late 70s, again in our home state, northern Pennsylvania, of an area where water will freeze in the summer, but not freeze in the winter. This again sounds as bizarre as spontaneous human combustion does. It doesn't make any sense. These are outdoor natural refrigerators. We got tipped off to the first one at Sweden Valley when we were investigating the case of Dr. Bentley. We've encountered under research that and there was a rumor of a second, we've learned that oftentimes when there are two odd things that happen in close proximity, there may well be a third. So we went back to Countersport looking for if there was a second and maybe a third natural refrigerator. What we discovered that weekend was not 2 or 3, but 5 places where water will freeze naturally in the hot months of summer, but not freeze in the ground in the cold months of winter. We plotted those 5 locations on a topo map, and they form a perfect triangle of about 27 square miles in size. So unlike the Bermuda Triangle, which is this kind of an amorphous, nondescript area, the Pennsylvania Triangle is a real geometric, bona fide triangle mystery. And in the heart of a triangle that is formed by water freezing in summer, Dr. Bentley spontaneously combusted in the dead of winter. Brings this full circle. 2 different thermal anomalies coming together in one location in northern Pennsylvania. It's quite astonishing.
Fire and ice. It's
fire and ice. Yeah,
that's you have gone full circle there. I suppose, yeah, as you said, it's environmental kind of case, and it's actually it's cooling down the water itself there environmentally there. Yeah, so I'd like to thank everyone there, those that watched us there. In a week's time, we have Eugene Doran from Afterlife Paranormal Ireland, and Eugene is going to be talking about the afterlife, visitations, and people's perceptions of paranormal investigators. So that'd be interesting there. Larry, it's been an honor to talk to you there, and I hope to see you soon there. And if you're ever in Ireland then as well, you're more than welcome. I'm down right at the bottom there, south coast there, and you're more than welcome. I'd love to go for a few shots of whiskey there.
You got a thumbs up in that one. We would love to meet you in person. We would love to get ourselves back to Ireland. It's an absolutely wonderful country. We thoroughly enjoyed our first trip there. Looking forward to more of them. Thank you for a totally delightfully enjoyable evening. Bless your heart. Best wishes.
Bless you as well. Love and light there, Larry. And thank you everyone that commented there. And I won't see you next time. I'll see you in the near distance. Goodbye for now. Bye.